joining us. The People's National Party prides itself on being the party for educational transformation in Jamaica. And in the wake of last week's events to do with education, we felt it necessary to express some concerns about the state of education and propose some systemic issues which need to be dealt with at this time. I want to make it very clear. This press conference will not find us accusing or finding guilty or innocent anyone. That's not the purpose. Now more than ever, strong restorative leadership is needed in the education and training sector. And you will notice that in PNP discourse about education, we always twin education and training. In this regard, the People's National Party holds to two important principles. The first is that universal, affordable, and effective education is the key to reducing crime and violence, assuring economic growth, and creating a Jamaica that works for all and not just for a few. Second, sound education policy and praxis can only be achieved by collaborative effort of all nationalist forces. I want to reiterate that. We believe, consistent with 2004 and subsequent pronouncements by party leadership on both sides of the political aisle, that education has to be above the political fray. The People's National Party stands ready at all times to collaborate with whoever is in government for the upliftment of education. This doesn't mean we can't criticize and show difficulties and also praise successes, but we adopt always not a confrontational, but a collaborative posture. On these foundations, our focus is now to how to root out corruption and wastage in education and training, given that the sector is now in crisis due to the dismissal of the minister amid allegations of malfeasance. I want to bring to your attention two main points. Both the recurrent and the capital budgets for education and training for the next 4 years are disgracefully flat. If you look at them, they're the government's own figures. They barely, if at all, keep pace with inflationary expectations and realities. This means that there is no space for waste, corruption, no friend business, no money to be used to advance anybody's political fortunes. Also, the rash of questions and allegations surrounding the Ministry of Education, the Caribbean Maritime University, the National Education Trust, and the Heart Trust NTA must be comprehensively addressed immediately. We have a list of questions to be presented today. MP Michael Stewart and Chairperson Elaine Foster-Allen will follow with those specific questions. In addition, there are other specific concerns. One, to be taken up in detail by Attorney Zulika Jess, is the Henry Morant, whose trial for murder is listed on the Supreme Court docket. Is he the same person as the chairman of the Central High School in Clarendon? And further, what is the Ministry of Education's plan to resolve the nasty conflict between the staff and board at Central High, and indeed at many other schools due to political interference and inappropriate appointments? Two, what assurances are there that all tendering and procurement requirements are observed or have been observed by the Ministry of Education for employment of persons, remuneration thereof, and all contracting for infrastructure and services? Three, has the gross and unfair disparity of state support between the University of the West Indies and UTEC been redressed? You will recall that we were promised that that would be done, I think, week before last. The budget debate has ended, and the situation remains, as far as we know, unresolved. And what about the inequity of infrastructure allocations to different constituencies on clearly partisan grounds? We repeat our earlier concern. It is not that the schools in Northwest and St. Anne didn't need capital investment, but so do schools in every constituency. And why has that one been able to secure millions, tens of millions of dollars of support, while others receive little or nothing? We have another concern. When will the vital legislation for the Jamaica Teaching Council and amendments to the education regulations of 1980 be brought to Parliament? And 5, what is the status of the Values and Attitudes program, which has obviously been sidelined? The PNP will continue to advocate for thoroughgoing transformation of the education and training sector. That is our undertaking. I would now ask Chair of the PNP's Education Commission, Mrs. Elaine Foster-Allen, to pose some of the specific questions that we have arising out of last week and earlier considerations, and she'll be followed by others delivered by MP Michael Stewart.
Has the Caribbean Maritime University hosted any birthday or appreciation parties for the former Minister, Ruel Reid, or any other senior official of the Ministry of Education between 2017 and now? And if so, what were the costs of these parties and who paid for them? Secondly, are any relatives of the former Minister Reid on staff at the CMU? When were the persons hired and what are the qualifications for the positions? Are any personal staff members of the former minister paid by the Caribbean Maritime University or any entity associated with the CMU? Are any spouses of the JLP MPs employed at the Ministry of Education or any agency that reports to the Ministry of Education? And what processes were used to hire them? We would like to know the number of consultants or advisors working at the CMU and what are their specific responsibilities and their remuneration. What are the specific responsibilities or tasks that former JLP MP Othniel Lawrence was asked to perform as an advisor to the CMU president? Is it a mere coincidence that his engagement at CMU was at the same time as Mr. Reid's announcement as candidate for North West St. Anne, a seat that Mr. Lawrence aspired to represent again? May I just also say one or two things, and then I'm going to hand back to Rev. When we think about issues to do with the way in which it appears that certain governance and processes and procedures have been compromised, we have to ask questions about, we go back to asking the questions about values and attitudes. Were we championing a curriculum and maybe we should say a country and a system of governance based on good values and attitudes and moral standards? Would we be at this press conference talking about these issues? The People's National Party believes in equity, social justice, the rule of law. And in the issues that Reverend Thwaites raised a little earlier, we would certainly be using our template to look at what has been done and how these things were done and how issues around equity and social justice and good governance and the rule of law were all undermined in regard to the allegations.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, what has transpired this week is unprecedented in Jamaica's history. First time that we are seeing where the Ministry of Education has been caught in this conundrum. And as a bastion for the education system, providing hope, moral and ethical principles, accountability, transparency, I believe that the ministry has been damaged significantly, and there is going to be need some restoration of hope if we are to correct this situation which has gone amiss. And we on the People's National Party, we are ready to do that. We have never seen this happening. It has never happened to anybody previously. And so we are indeed concerned. Our students are preparing for their national examination at this time. They have completed the ability test. We are now looking at the performance task. We are now looking at the curriculum-based test, which should be coming up in May. And there is tremendous concern in the field there with the educators, with teachers, the students, parents. And we believe that the system has been damaged significantly by what has transpired with all these allegations which we know are being investigated. I would like, however, to ask some follow-up questions. Is the manager for donor relationship at the National Education Trust contracted to both the CMU and the Ministry of Education at the same time? What procurement guidelines were utilized in awarding the contracts to CMU for the construction refurbishment of some schools? Example, Discovery Bay upgraded high school, Brownstown receiving a new block, New Forest in St. Elizabeth receiving a new block. We are thankful to these for these benefits that the schools have gotten, but were they followed the proper guidelines? Were they being followed? The minister speaks about accountability, transparency, good governance, but he has diverted from these aspects in the way he has handled the situation. Were any resources of the CMU deployed to support Railway's candidacy in Northwest St. Ann? Specifically, were any of the unmarked CMU buses used for partisan political purposes? Were any resources of the CMU diverted to support the construction of a home of a senior CMU official in the eastern end of the island? These are fundamental questions which we need some answers for.
We received information this morning questioning the devolution of funds towards a very significant program, which is the award of scholarships for training teachers in mathematics and science. And we are anxious to know if the number of persons who have been given these scholarships this year, and also how the payment of funds has in fact been achieved. Members of the media should be aware that we've probably lost more than 100 of our best math and science teachers to overseas recruitment this year so far. And therefore the recruitment of others and their appropriate training is greatly important. This needs to be fully understood. We've also received, the party has also received questions from members of the alumni associations who have chapters in the United States, offering concerns about funds that they have donated through the National Education Trust, and asking for a complete accounting of those funds and the criteria on which they have been dispersed to which educational institutions. It is best if we have full understanding of those issues. There are a number of issues to do with the relationship between the Ministry of Education and the Jamaica College Board in relation to the substantive principal, Mr. Royal Reed, of that institution, the People's National Party does not understand how someone who is serving as a full-time minister of government can remain the substantive principal of a high school or any institution. And we are anxious to know, or think the public has a right to know, what are the terms and conditions that that continuing appointment derived. For example, my own experience tells me that a minister of government routinely receives a housing allowance.
Yes.
We understand from the proceedings of the Standing Finance Committee, MP Stewart will remember, that the minister at the time acknowledged that he was living in the house of the principal at Jamaica College. And I think he acknowledged also that he was living there rent-free.
Yes, and duty-free.
So was that appropriate? And remember, what we are anxious to do is to have clear and transparent guidelines going forward. That is our purpose, that can guide the entire education system. We also have some questions to do with what happens now. Will the contracts of those who may have or are alleged to have had been recruited by whichever institution, by the former minister, are they going to retain their posts? We can't forget what has happened with Petrojam.
Yes.
Are funds to be repaid where the appointments were not according to specifications and guidelines? And could we just say no more non-disclosure agreements in respect of this issue, as we had unfortunately had in the past? I'm sure other questions will arise as we go forward, but at this point I would like to call upon Attorney at Law Zuleika Jess, the party's candidate for Central Clarendon, who has been very concerned with regard to the happenings at Central High School, which we believe may be emblematic of a systemic problem which needs our attention, the nation's attention as well.
I believe it has become fundamentally clear that the education sector is in a crisis. What we're seeing represents a plethora of allegations of mismanagement, cronyism, corruption at every single level of the sector. And in Central Clarendon, it has been no different. For example, what we're understanding, most of you might have been aware of the fact that the teachers went on protest action some time ago regarding the continued appointment of the chairman of the school board, Mr. Henry Morant. Now, what we have to understand is that this is an individual who was recommended to serve as chairman of a school board at a time when he was actually facing a charge of murder. No one would think that that in and of itself would have been a disqualifying factor, bearing in mind that we're talking about education. We're talking about the fact that young, impressionable students are looking on and seeing, observing what is taking place. How can we feel comfortable as a country knowing that we have appointed to serve as board chairman an individual who has been charged with such an egregious offense? Now, we understand that the presumption of innocence, we understand that, but it is our view that in circumstances where education, which is such a critical sector, it should be beyond reproach. The person who occupies the position of board chairman is essentially overseeing the future of our nation's children. And so it is important that that person, his character, should never be questionable. His integrity must always be intact and should never be subject to doubt. And so it is our considered view, and it is indeed our strong position, that the chairman of the school board of Central High needs to submit his resignation. immediately. And if that is not done within the next 24 hours, then the Minister of Education needs to act swiftly, he needs to act decisively, and he needs to demand that resignation pursuant to Section 79(3), which empowers the minister to, at any time that he considers it expedient to do so, revoke the appointment of a board chairman. All that is needed is for him to consult with the National Council on Education before doing so. He does not need the permission. He does not need approval. He simply needs to tell them that that is the course he's going to take. The nation's children must be given priority. The nation's children must be of paramount consideration in deciding how we deal with this issue. Furthermore, I feel, and I believe it is the party's strong position, that there must be a very clear set of guidelines concerning the criteria that should be used to govern the appointment of board chairmen. We understand that there is reference in the manual of the NCE that speaks to persons having good character and being fit and proper person, but that in and of itself is not sufficient. There needs to be a comprehensive and detailed set of criteria that should never be departed from. We also wish to hear from the Member of Parliament for Central High, because we understand that the recommendation for that individual to serve as board chairman was actually a recommendation from the Member of Parliament, Mr. Mike Henry. And so we believe that it is imperative that Mr. Henry indicate and advise us, the members of the public, as to the factors, the reasons operating on his mind when he made the recommendation for an individual charged with murder to sit and preside over the affairs of a government-run school board. We need to know from Mr. Henry whether the requisite due diligence checks were conducted. We need to find out from Mr. Henry whether he was satisfied that that individual is a person, is a fit and proper person to be appointed as chairman. All of those questions need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed speedily and in the interest of the nation's children. But until such time, what is without doubt and what should be the case, because this is not something that should be capable of serious dispute. I think we can achieve bipartisan consensus on this issue, that an individual charged with murder should not be serving as board chairman, and so that individual needs to go instantly.
There's one other issue that I'd like to raise before we invite your questions. The People's National Party has, for many years, while we were in administration and subsequently, admired the progress and fostered the progress of the Caribbean Maritime University. And we have had high regard for the principal of the president of the university, Dr. Fritz Pinnock. Dr. Pinnock has recently stated that he was not chairman of the Royal Reed Foundation, and we take him at his word, of course. But a disservice has been done to Dr. Pinnock, because on the letterhead of the Royal Reed Foundation, which is in our possession, he is listed as chairman. So we, as I began, members of the media, we have no aspersions and no guilt to ascribe. What we are to do is in the interest of the systemic transformation of education and its proper ordering. Ask the questions that need to be answered now and conclusively, so that we can get on with the progression of PEP, with the issues that are thrown up by the recent report on the Caribbean examinations, and with a very important issue of central significance, which is the ways in which we are going to end what our leader, Dr. Phillips, has correctly called the apartheid in education. These anomalies, these issues have to be settled.